can start.
Please begin. Everyone's entered, and we're very excited to have you join our session. I'll hand it over to our chair, Michael Bothe.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. We are assembled really internationally, the Eastern Hemisphere, because the Western Hemisphere is still asleep. We have party panelists from Kazakhstan, from Pakistan, from Africa, and from Spain. So good morning, everybody. Also, good morning, the audience. Before starting on the substance, I'm supposed to read out the code of conduct, and there is a compliance reminder. By registering and participating in this event, you agree to abide by the NPAC's anti-discrimination, harassment, and retaliation policy. Harassing in every form is unacceptable. There will be consequences. If you witness or are subjected to unacceptable behavior, if you are subjected to or notice that someone else is being subjected to unacceptable behavior or have any other problems, please immediately notify conference@environmentalpeacebuilding.org or Erika Weinthal, erika.weinthal@duke.edu, or Carl, our president, Bruch@eli.org. Those reports remain strictly confidential. So I think I've done my duty as far as the formalities are concerned, and we can start with the substance of the meeting. All human activities have to take into account their environmental consequences. All includes military activities and even the conduct of hostilities. This is a general rule which was introduced into the international discourse at the time of the '72 Stockholm Conference. It met some resistance, and I can tell you that because I was involved in some of those negotiations in the early '70s, but by now it's generally accepted, and the details have to be elaborated, and today we are going to elaborate some important details of this rule. The rule includes a sub-rule that environmental damage caused by armed conflict is, as a matter of principle, unlawful under international law if it's not justified by some international legal reason. And thus, the prohibition of environmental damage becomes part of the rules restraining the use of military force. And there are three levels of these rules. First is what is called the jus ad bellum. I prefer the word jus contra bellum because the essence is the prohibition of the use of force. The second level is what is called the jus in bello. Once the rules concerning the jus ad bellum or the jus contra bellum have been violated, a second series or a second level of rules enters how to conduct hostilities. And these rules contain important rules concerning the protection of the environment. And there is a third level, which is also called the jus post bellum, the law which is applicable after a conflict ends, And that is where essentially environmental peace building is located. So we have a number of specific questions we have to deal with. A number of rules concerning both the rules concerning the use of force and general environmental law. My first question is, and we'll have contributions on that, what type of environmental damage is to be considered? Second, how do we evaluate that environmental damage, putting figures to that damage, because this is absolutely important for the question of compensation. Third, how do we prove environmental damage? Questions of evidence. And then the reparation of damage and sanctions against perpetrators. And in the end, we have to go back to the basics, to the questions of environmental damage and sustainable development. And that is essentially where environmental peace building is located. But all the questions which arrived before are, so to say, the basis of what comes at the end. It is now my pleasant duty to announce the speakers. The first speaker on my list is Dominique Asanga Yamba. And now I have to put some order into my papers. He has disappeared somehow. I'm sorry, I'll be right back to you. Here we are. Dominique is expert for environmental and social safeguards for the Great Lakes Agricultural Growth Project, responsible for issues related to environmental assessment in the area in terms of the management and prevention or anticipatory instruments, and those related to monitoring and control. He holds a diploma of advanced studies in geography, environmental science from the National Pedagogical University of Kinshasa, with the subject exactly what we are dealing with today, namely the environmental impact of conflicts related to a particular area, namely the exploitation of natural resources in the territory of Walikale. He is a co-founder of our association. He will speak French, but I'll give you some summaries. So those who do not understand French, please remain in the meeting. You'll get an English summary of what Dominique has to say. Dominique, vous avez la parole.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Bothe. OK, le sujet que je vais partager avec vous, c'est dommages environnementaux causés par les conflits armés dans les territoires de Walikale au sud Kivu en RDC. En principe, au début, j'ai préparé un sujet sur lequel je devais parler sur la disparition de la ville d'Uvira. Mais après l'échange avec le professeur, il m'a dit que je dois adapter le sujet, d'où j'ai été obligé de rebondir sur sa préoccupation. C'est pourquoi je vous présente ces quelques 8 diapositives, juste pour donner le briefing de ces conflits armés à Walikale et les dommages causés au niveau de l'environnement. We can go the second slide. OK, le plan de l'exposé Nous avons les dommages causés par, est-ce qu'on peut, la suivante, the second slide. Ok, nous avons une petite introduction, impact sur les infrastructures, impact environnementaux, impact sur les social et une petite conclusion.
If I may just, I think it's the best thing I translate the slides. First, introduction. Second, impact on the infrastructure. Third, environmental impact. Fourth, social impacts, and then comes a conclusion. So thank you. Please go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much. You can go. OK, introduction. Les dommages causés par les conflits armés peuvent être observés par la destruction physique des infrastructures et dysfonctionnement de l'administration publique. C'est ce qu'on a constaté. Les pertes de vies humaines et ou invalidation, les viols, etc. Troisième point, c'est la pollution de l'environnement. C'est ce qu'on a constaté sur le territoire de Walikale. De 1996 en 2020, le territoire de Walikale a connu les militaires, donc les offensives militaires, ce qu'on appelle opération Sokola 1 et Sokola 2, et l'activisme des groupes armés. Mais en ce jour, le territoire est sous état de siège.
Yes, environmental damages caused by conflict can be enumerated by 3 points: physical destruction of infrastructures and malfunction of the public administration. Second, a loss of human life or casualties, rape and so on. And third, environmental pollution. And there was in the territory in question, North Kivu, from 96 to 22, military operations and activities of armed groups.
Okay, welcome.
Yes.
Another slide.
Here
Okay.
you see the structures.
Nous sommes sur le terrain. Ça, c'est les villages qui ont été incendiés. Je suis là en train de montrer après les incendies des villages. Vous avez cette photo, c'est les destructions des champs. On a incendié les champs de culture. Ici, c'est les campements de déplacés qu'on a classés. S'il faut arriver sur le terrain, vous allez constater qu'il y a une forte pression sur les ressources en eau, ressources en bois, et tout autour, comme il n'y a pas de latrines appropriées, donc l'environnement est complètement pollué par les matières fécales. Donc, voici au moins la destruction physique qu'on a observée dans les différents villages de Walikale. Les incendies des villages et les incendies des cultures. À vous, professeur.
Well, the destruction of the village entails all types of environmental consequences, including no wastewater treatment, which of course causes heavy pollution. Yeah.
Okay, we can go.
Here we come to the subject of remnants of war, and you see some of the examples of unexploded remnants. Yeah.
Okay. Maintenant, nous sommes sur les impacts environnementaux les plus caractéristiques sont les restes d'explosifs et de la guerre et les mines terrestres. C'est le grand problème que nous avons aujourd'hui. Vous arrivez au niveau des champs, vous y trouvez les obus qui n'ont pas éclaté, tels que vous voyez là-bas. Ça se trouve camouflé dans les herbes. Et dans nos systèmes d'aménagement des pistes agricoles, on a un problème sérieux qu'il faut commencer d'abord par chercher à nettoyer ces polluants environnementaux qui sont les rejets de la guerre. Donc, tel que vous voyez, ça c'est au niveau de la forêt, lancés et non explosés, lancés et non explosés, lancés, ce sont des obus qu'on a lancés, mais qui n'ont pas pu exploser. Mais c'est un danger permanent au niveau de l'environnement. Professeur?
So he shows the serious consequences of unexploded ordnance, which is hidden somewhere in the fields and is a great danger and makes agriculture next to impossible. Yeah.
OK, on peut aller pour gagner le temps.
Yes, allez-y.
Voilà. Nous avons maintenant les mines antipersonnelles. Vous voyez maintenant cette mine, à force de beaucoup plus rester dans les milieux, ça se dégrade sur l'action de l'oxydation. Les herbes sont complètement détruites à ce niveau-là. Donc, ce sont des polluants environnementaux qui peuvent causer des conséquences graves. L'image, la première image là, je suis là, j'ai de contempler une mine terrestre que les villageois ont découvert, mais qu'on a quadrillé, qui n'était pas jusque-là déminée. Ici, c'est une mine qui est exposée, mais qu'on a vue. De l'autre côté, nous avons encore une autre mine terrestre et à la fin, vous avez les munitions de petit calibre. Donc, ce sont des substances qui polluent l'environnement, mais qu'on tient trop peu d'attention lorsqu'on fait l'évaluation post-conflit.
So this is another plague, namely still active mines or unexploded mines, which prevent any positive use of the area, prevent the rehabilitation for roads for agricultural use. Yes.
Le dernier, j'espère. Voilà, yes. Voici les impacts sociaux sont beaucoup plus caractérisés par les décès qu'on n'a pas pu chercher à dénombrer, les pillages qui étaient effectués, mais sur l'activité des mines, vous voyez les chiffres sont colossaux. De 2002 en 2013, nous avons 2470 victimes sur les mines terrestres, soit sur les explosifs. Vous jouez avec un explosif et ça s'explose, vous êtes victime. Ensuite, de 2013, en 2017, nous avons 140 victimes. Au total, 2270 victimes qui sont tombées sur les polluants environnementaux qui se trouvent dans les campements des militaires ou bien là où se trouvaient les groupes armés. Mais pour votre information, les territoires avaient plus ou moins 27 groupes armés qui se déplaçaient après chaque 3 mois. Donc, les QG se déplaçaient régulièrement.
I think the slides is everybody can read that. It enumerates the number of victims in various periods, 2002 to 2013, and then 2013 to 2017. So it's an enormous number of victims of these military activities.
OK. Selon Goethe, la pollution de l'environnement par les conflits armés et l'explosion des guerres, c'est un problème mondial qui reçoit trop peu d'attention. Le territoire de Walikale n'est pas épargné de cette situation. Donc, je me suis référé à ça. Ce sont des polluants qui polluent l'environnement. Mais avec l'activisme des guerres, normalement, on oublie ça, mais il y a des conséquences pour la réhabilitation des pistes de dessertes agricoles, désenclaver les villages. Il se pose toujours beaucoup plus de problèmes, mais qu'on a trop peu d'attention. Des fois, il n'y a pas aussi les moyens pour faire des systèmes de déminage ou bien de dégradation des métaux. J'ai dit et je vous remercie.
Well, Dominique, thank you. You gave an example of an environmental and social problem which exists all around the world, but it's very important to see that in the concrete example of the territory you are dealing with, and you have taken photos, and you have pointed out a central problem of environmental peacebuilding, which is demining, cleaning territories, areas which are polluted by the toxic remnants of war. So I think this is an important start of our discussion, reminding us of the really sad and serious problems of leftovers from war. Thank you very much. So may I now invite Montserrat to start her presentation. I'm sorry, I have to go back to my papers, which I tried to put into order, but I did not quite manage it. I would like to do. Here we are. So Montserrat Abad Castelos is a professor of public international law at the University Carlos III of Madrid, graduate in law from the University of Santiago de Compostela, and holds a PhD from the University Complutense of Madrid. She is currently the co-director of the International Council of Environmental Law's International Secretariat. She is a member of the Center of Studies and Dissemination of the International Humanitarian Law of the Spanish Red Cross, and was a legal advisor in the International Legal Department of the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She has been visiting fellow at the British Institute of International and Comparative Law, the Lund University Center for Sustainability in Sweden, and the Center of European Law and Internationalization at the University of Leicester. As you can see, her main fields of interest are connected with terrorism and international humanitarian law, international environmental peace building, and civil society issues. So that is exactly what we are dealing with. Welcome among us. You have the floor.
Thank you. It is a great honor for me to share this session with this widely recognized chair and colleagues, and also with the audience. Thank you, and thanks also to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Well, this picture portrays a team of the United Nations Mine Action Service in action in war-torn Mosul, Iraq. This program was launched in 2015 to assist the government of Iraq in managing the emergency response to the then ongoing conflict against the ISIS. And there is still a significant mine action capacity gap in Iraq at the moment, although multiple national and international companies, private companies, and also NGOs are commissioned to survey and clear affected areas. Needless to say, this situation caused very grave impact, severe impact, both humanitarian and environmental, in a vicious circle.
Sorry,
Well,
are you supposed to be sharing a presentation? Sorry.
Yes, of course.
We don't
Yes.
see it. We don't see it, sorry.
You don't see it?
No.
It is not possible
We only
to
see you.
and the remaining people in the audience, it is not visible for anyone?
No, if you click share screen at the bottom of your screen again.
Sorry, yeah. My fault maybe. Let me again to try. Sorry.
No problem.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Here we are.
So thank you for warning me, because I was showing you the first picture showing the work of this team of the UN Mine Action Service. And from now on, I would like to show you the following points that I intend to look at very briefly, I promise. First, a paradoxical regression. Second, the Iraqi war from 2014 to 2017, one of the new wars. Third, the remnants of war and beyond. The fourth point, Unidad, proper transitional justice foundation. And finally, the key findings. So very briefly, first of all, well, Iraq is the cradle of civilization. Thousands of years ago, it was the scene of prodigious progress for humanity, where writing, city-states, and written law flourished, and even where the first antecedents in the recognition of human rights took place here. However, despite this magnificent past, the present has borne witness to paradoxical regressions, as I have already told, more recently in the form of successive waves of violence. And over the last 30 years, the means and methods of warfare used in different armed conflicts have been deeply impactful from a humanitarian and environmental point of view. This degradation of environment is to a great extent tied up with first the conflict, Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s, which led to extensive laying of landmines. The Gulf War in 1991 witnessed other devastating weapons impacting in the country. In this case, many came from the air. The US coalition bombed critical infrastructure such as water treatment facilities, food processing plants. Also, it is estimated that during the Gulf Wars in 1991 and in 2003, the US targeted Iraq with about 1,200 tons of ammunition. And the amount of explosive weaponry used by non-state actors is partially unknown, but likely equals or exceeds these figures. And also, evidence indicates that depleted uranium was used by the USA and UK during 1991 and 2003 in more than 1,000 locations, including densely populated areas. Well, we are going to see in 1 minute the last conflict in greater depth. Anyway, it is important to keep in mind that the current situation is not good. Is not there is not an open armed conflict, but it is not a positive peace either, in the sense that Galton had coined. Mass media are showing us the ISIS seized a jail in Syria a few days ago to try to free thousands of fellow jihadists. And according to different reports, ISIS is regaining strength in Iraq and Syria at the moment. Well, the last conflict, which took place in Iraq from 2014 to 2017, part of it also in Syria, it can be qualified as one of the new wars, using the term coined by Mary Kaldor and Christine Chinking, because the main features, as you know, is that they usually involve terrorism, the targeting of civilians, civilian property, natural environment, even though most of these armed conflicts are of a non-international character, at least from a formal point of view, they are in practice highly internationalized because of the intervention of proxies. And as it is well known, the ISIS held vast areas of Iraq and Syria, more than 100,000 square kilometers, and there are 11 million inhabitants under its control. During the Caliphate, it committed brutal violations of the international human rights law, of the international humanitarian law, of the international criminal law as well, and also of the international environmental law in the territories of both states. Although the numbers of deaths and displaced persons in Iraq have been considerably lower than those reported in Syria, and the conflict in Syria is still open, the crimes committed by ISIS reflect the same pattern of outrage. In fact, with respect to this last conflict, it is usually said that ISIS practiced or committed a scorched earth policy in Iraq. Around 63 cities and 1,156 villages were reportedly destroyed during the Caliphate. And also, according to different estimations, over 55 million tons of debris was generated from residential buildings. There have been different entities, governmental and non-governmental, who have approached to assess the harms, the damages caused by this conflict. UNEP released an initial assessment of pollution issues in areas retaken from ISIS, highlighting the risks from damaged ISIS ammunition manufacturing plants, contamination from attacks on energy infrastructure, environmental challenges posed by the huge amount of debris, also the collapse, the problems caused by the collapse of environmental governance. And there have been other entities in the world of civil society organizations which are very committed with this topic, as for instance, CEOPS, the Conflict Environment Observatory, or PACS, which have launched different specific reports examining the concrete damages that this war caused in the territory. And in this field of the key areas of environmental concern, it is necessary to highlight the problem of the unexploited ordnance, but also the pollution from attacks on oil infrastructure, and also the increase of artisanal oil refining, causing also other toxic and remnants of war, also damage to agriculture. In the case of Sinjar, the genocide was accompanied by the destruction of the agricultural environment, and this destruction transformed the city into a dead land. This is the title chosen by Amnesty International to study the ISIS deliberate destruction of agricultural lands in this area. And this deliberate targeting the rural environment in this area destroyed not only the source of the population's livelihood, but also the cradle of one of the oldest agriculture civilizations in history. So to deal with, this, with some of the damages caused by this conflict, the United Nations Security Council established a new mechanism, Unidad, an investigative team, having as the main purpose the collection, the preservation, and the storage of evidence to be used mainly by Iraqi tribunals, but also there is an open door to be used by other national jurisdictions and even international jurisdictions in the future. In fact, so far, different national jurisdictions, 8 or 9 at the moment, have asked for specific pieces of evidence, Germany and Finland, among others. And the scope is referred to acts that can amount to war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide committed in Iraq by only one part of the conflict, Daesh, which has been criticized because it's not a completely neutral mechanism, unlike, for instance, other which are functioning towards Syria or towards another conflict. And the main criticism which is made is the lack of environmental concerns, because environmental crimes, environmental issues are not considered, at least from an explicit way, in the mandate of this important mechanism. So, studying this topic, I found that there are some dialectical tensions which underlie. For example, there is a tension between anti-terrorism measures and other kind of measures, in particular the anti-atrocity crime measures. And the anti-terrorist measures are prevailing as far as the Daesh is involved. Also, there is a dialectical tension concerning the remnants of war. On the one hand, the destruction and inutilization as the first objective to get, and on the other hand, with the accountability issues, neglecting the possibility to take evidence for an eventual future prosecution when it's needed. There are relevant actors and instruments that are focusing on environmental related aspects regarding conflict. UNEP, the International Law Commission, with the current draft of articles on environment in relation with armed conflict. Also, the International Committee of the Red Cross updating its previous guidelines. Also, the International Organization for Migration, which has considered, for example, the problem of the herbicide in relation with Sinjar, the complete destruction of the landscape, and also civil society organizations as PACs, as CEOPS, among others, while there are others that should pay attention to their significance, and therefore also to other crucial issues in relation to Iraq, in particular, as for instance, Unidad and UNAMI and the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, because in their sound statements within the reports on the importance of human rights issues, there could be more acute, more enriched if they use the intertwined aspects with environmental aspects. Also, the special rapporteur on the human rights of internally displaced persons, that in the last report only mentioned the remnants of war as an obstacle, but the environment was not mentioned at all, and even there was not a distinction either between explosive or toxic remnants of war. And this is very important to be prepared in order to make sure that the return can be completed. So I'm afraid that there are too many unsolved issues at the moment, and I'm afraid that this can be related to this eternal cycle so far regarding violence that the country, that Iraq, is suffering. And well, it could be possible to bring multiple perspectives of analysis and conclusions, but I have to end my presentation in time. So even at the risk of oversimplifying, I would like to convey just a basic message, which is the following: that as conclusion, there is still a chance for Unidad and other relevant bodies to pay attention to environmental issues, taking advantage of their work. It is still possible. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Montserrat. You point out two basic difficulties, namely that in judging, taking evidence about violations of the law, the environment is easily forgotten, and other very serious things, very serious violations retain our attention. And the second point I would like to stress is the question of evidence, because there will be no consequences if there is not enough evidence. And you gave very important examples of taking evidence of violations, including, at least to a certain extent, violations of environmental rules of behavior. So thank you very much. And that question of evidence brings us to our next speaker, who's Brendan Duprey. He is founding director of the Sustainable Kazakhstan Research Institute and associate professor in sustainable development at the Narxoz University in Almaty in Kazakhstan. He has been working globally for over a decade on solutions-driven sustainability programs and research. Over the course of his career, he has been known as sustainability leader with the ability to integrate its diverse aspects to drive solutions by connecting and leading teamwork actors across sectors. As an academic, Brendan holds a PhD in environmental science and policy from the Central European University in Budapest. From 2007 to 2019, he worked as a senior advisor to the Truth Hounds, a human rights NGO based in Ukraine, where he developed a unique methodology to identify the environmental impacts of war, traveling to the front lines and collecting first-person accounts and supplementary primary and secondary source material. The evidence was provided to the International Criminal Court and also turned into a policy paper used by government officials and experts worldwide and has been widely cited. His presentation will highlight this work and open a floor for dialogue on this important topic. So, Brandon, this looks very interesting. So you have the floor. Where is he?
Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. So as Michael said, I will be presenting the work that I did from 2017 to 2018 when I was living in Ukraine. But I just like to add that the organization that I had developed this methodology for, the Truth Hounds, continues to use that methodology and is actively collecting evidence on the front lines of environmental crimes and supported by the National Endowment for Democracy. So I stay updated on what's happening there and am actively involved in research. So I'd like to also just give you for all of the international people here, to just remind you all that this conflict is not a new conflict, but a conflict that had started in 2014 with the occupation of the eastern territories of Ukraine, Lugansk and Donetsk Republic, and also the seizure of Crimea, which is in green, by the Russian Federation. And here I can show you, you can see on the map, the purple is basically the area which is the occupied forces in Ukraine, and also where separatists are. So I'll just tell you briefly about what the methodology was of our work. Because we are working with the Truth Hounds organization, they have official permission to go to the front lines, past these security checkpoints, and be in the villages directly where the front lines are and where the shelling's happening. So we went there and we did case studies on site. We interviewed people from the local administration, from the different companies there, villagers, military forces, to collect direct evidence. We were also taking photographs and collecting documents from the local authorities. And we also did something quite unique, I think, in which would be useful for evidence collecting for environmental crimes, is to also collect social media posts that are taken by local people on Facebook and Instagram that live in that area. And you can use that not as direct evidence, but you can use it for data triangulation, helping identify exact times, exact locations, and to even go and to take soil samples or measurements that are needed to further create a robust data set for evidence collection. And the purpose of this was to get an in-depth understanding both of the direct and indirect impacts of the war and their impacts on vulnerable people that live on the front lines, to systematize environmental hazards in the region, and also to identify any potential violations of international law. Why is this important? There's been ever-growing concern by the international community in relation to the environmental impacts of the war. And I always like to stress not only the environmental impacts, but what matters first and foremost is how that affects local people that are living on the front lines and that are affected by this conflict and by this environmental degradation. And so, not to go into detail, you can read it on the slides, but basically the Rome Statute covers environmental impacts of war. You have the Convention on the Prohibition of Military and any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques. Actually, we found this to be a much more effective way to report environmental crimes because the evidence required can be one incidence and not like long-term on purpose environmental crime that's covered under the Rome Statute. So this convention, the second one, we found to be much easier in terms of reporting environmental crimes. Also in Ukraine, there's been a request to systematize the environmental impacts of the war in this region. A lot of environmental groups and also government agencies are not traveling there frequently, and a lot of these large industrial sites are kind of left to decay, and there hasn't been much identification of the long-term impacts of that. And also, of course, it's covered under these Sustainable Development Goals with the goal to create more peaceful, just, and inclusive societies which are free from fear and violence. Another important part I'd like to mention to you is that also the eastern part of Ukraine is one of the most industrialized regions in Europe. There's heavy industries there, coke plants, phenol plants, coal mining industry is quite large there. There's been even some underground nuclear testing. So it's a large industrial area with continuous shelling back and forth across the border, which poses a whole host of dangers and threats to the region. Also, if you look at these Sustainable Development Goals and you kind of do a mapping of that with international human rights law, you can see that when it comes to clean water and sanitation, sustainable consumption and production patterns, life on land, and partnerships for goals, that human rights law fits nicely into the Sustainable Development Goals, and not only fits into it, but is an integral part of the implementation of the SDGs. So there's other reports on the environmental hazards in the region. Why is this report somehow different, or how does it add to the data that has been collected in the area? First off is we were actually on site in the front lines collecting data from local informants, as we mentioned, people from the regional municipalities, from the mining companies, and a whole host of people we interviewed there, probably about 60 even for our first visit, which is quite extensive. We were there for 2 weeks. Also, we identified the environmental impacts and the underlying reasons for them. And also we documented some of the environmental war crimes that were in the region. And so another interesting part of our research is that we kind of systematized it after we collected the data into direct impacts and indirect impacts of war. And I think that this adds a very important context to how environmental damage as a result of war is understood and analyzed. So for direct impacts, of course, naturally you have shelling that's happening, even though there's a peace agreement there. After the lights go out, so once all the international peacekeepers leave, 5, 6 p.m., essentially the shells start going back and forth. And while we were visiting there, we saw at least 2 or 3 shells landing in neighboring areas. So it's a very serious issue, and there's ongoing hostilities that are still happening in the region. And of course, if you have shelling, what do you have? Fires in the forests and fields, breakage of water, electricity, and gas pipes. You have damage to industrial objects. So for example, you have large tailing ponds for chemical manufacturing processes. And you can imagine if a shell lands there, what could be the potential damage, such as damage to the tailing ponds themselves, damage to critical infrastructure, and also fires in the tailing ponds that can happen as a result of shelling. And a lot of these tailing ponds have toxic chemicals there. So even when we were walking, collecting data, we went to a phenol plant and we went to the tailing facility, and my eyes were just burning and started watering, and I had to leave the area because it was so intense. You also have the mines. So basically, as a result of the shelling, some of the mines have collapsed. And naturally, you have air pollution and soil pollution from the shelling. And the second is, which is another very interesting aspect, is how military positions create environmental waste. So, you have large military units going to the front lines, shooting back and forth, and they have spent shells, grenades, just basic waste that is created when people are living in an area. And naturally, there's no recycling or proper use of that. A lot of that's abandoned and left on the front lines and in the trenches, which creates a lot of environmental damage. And another interesting part many people don't think of is what are the indirect impacts of the war, So like, for instance, if you have a front line and then you have the opposite force, which is another front line, you have an area in between the two, which is could be 2 kilometers, could be 5 kilometers, which is kind of like a no man's land while they shoot and shell back and forth. And these areas, especially in eastern part of Ukraine, actually have mining facilities there, like tailing ponds, coal mines, which need to be pumped out because they're highly acidic. And those areas can't be accessed in order for basic maintenance. Or if there is a shell which lands and there's a breakage in a tailing pond, for instance, nobody can go there to try to mitigate the damage or even to assess the damage, because it's this no man's land territory between the two sides. Also, to encourage business there, they, because the businesses, a lot of them left because it's very difficult to operate in those areas, is that there is a moratorium on inspections of these facilities. So you can imagine in a normal country where you have a properly functioning democracy without war, you have environmental services which go and do evaluations to see whether companies are polluting or not, or whether they're sticking with environmental regulations. And when you have a moratorium on that all along the front lines, the companies can kind of do what they want because nobody's controlling them, which is a big problem. They banned hunting in the region, which created an increase in wild boar population and diseases, because they don't want people going around there with AK-47s. They don't know who's the opposite force or who these people are, and they're at risk of being shot. So because they banned hunting, there's been an increase in the wild boar population, which has created a lot of damage to the ecology in the region. You have tax cuts for businesses. So usually there's an environmental tax you have to pay, and they cut the taxes to encourage those companies to stay in that region. And this isn't going into the ecological fund that the municipalities usually use to help protect the environment, which creates more environmental degradation. And of course, you have forced migration due to lack of electricity and water. So when there's shelling and the water pipes are damaged or the electricity is cut, then people just can't live there. And if they can afford it, they just flee the area. So there's been massive migration to Kiev and to other major cities, and these areas are basically abandoned, besides a lot of elderly retired people that can't afford to leave the area, or people just in general who are poor and don't have the ability, or family members to flee the region. So I'll just go into a few of the examples. So I have about 4 or 5 minutes left, so I'll try to be quick. The first part is fires in, these are examples of the direct impact, fires in forest and agricultural lands. So this is a national park, and I spoke with the director of the national park in this area, and we collected evidence there. And he said that there was massive fires due to shelling, destroyed endemic plants. And even when we were there, we saw spent artillery shells, and also grenades that were even there. Like there's area that when we were there, we even discovered a grenade, and then they called the local security services to come and to pick it up. So that basically, here you can see before, this is before the war, and this is after in the same area. as a result of the shelling. There is a pig farm. So pig farms, they basically, after the pigs, have waste, they collect it in a big tailing pond, which is very toxic. All of the pig waste goes there. And there's a shell which landed and it broke one of the tailing ponds and it leaked out into a local village. And as a result of that, several cows died, and the local people who have, small land that they farm on was completely destroyed as a result of this. And also, in general, this type of waste can cause burning of the eyes, nose, and throat and respiratory tract. There's a coke plant we also went to and spoke with the director there and took pictures. And there's been more than 320 shells which have landed there. 100 tons of phenol was burnt. And, there's a neighboring village close by. And the neighbors were saying that they had severe lung problems. Several of them had to go to the hospital when this was released into the air because it's extremely toxic. Again, tailing, this was the one I was telling you where my eyes was burning when I went there. There was shelling, which was happening there to the phenol tailing ponds. And as a result of that, there were some fires that have happened. And as I was mentioning, that can be very bad for people when they breathe or for their eyes, respiratory system. It's a big problem. So lack of access of monitoring between the two sides. I mentioned this a little bit, but there's a phenol, so there's a phenol plant and they have a slurry location, which is kind of in between that area. And there was an agreement because a shell landed there where they were able to access the dam. But in general, it's very difficult to make these agreements, and shells are landing quite frequently. And that's a major risk to the local population there. Moratorium on inspections. I mentioned that they froze the ability of the environmental services to go there and inspect these sites. And as a result of that, for these high-risk enterprises, their free will to do as they wish there. And one example is that there's an illegal pit, which we found through our informants. And this is basically a coal mining site, but an illegal one that wasn't approved by the government. But because there's no inspections, they allow it to go on. And it's actually connected to the electrical grid in the neighboring city. And you can imagine if you have an illegal coal mine there, there's a risk of the local people who are working in this illegal coal mine going in there and for the coal mine to collapse because there's nobody regulating it, regulating safety there. And also there's a possibility for it to flood. And if it floods, the acids will go into the neighboring waterway, which can create major ecological damage. Okay, so those are just a few examples that I wanted to list. I'll just go to my policy recommendations and then I'll have my last slide. So obviously there's hostilities in the region. They need to immediately cease. It's obviously illegal. And all of these aggressive actions towards the sovereign country of Ukraine need to end. They have to stop this moratorium on environmental inspections because it's going to lead to long-term damage, especially when people, after the conflict is over, will seek a right of return and go back to where they used to live. They need to have a clean ecological area to go back to. There needs to be a joint mechanism for inspections for this no man's land between the two areas. So if there's an accident, it's also not good for the occupied territories. So there needs to be some cooperation agreement set up, perhaps with international organizations like the OSCE, to immediately service and to identify the impacts of any sort of breakage that could happen in this no man's land to some of the tailing ponds or mines. There should be a fund set up for monitoring and upkeep. And then they should also create a joint committee for from the ministries of joint forces and the environment for monitoring upkeep and protection of these vulnerable sites, and also to use the methodology for future research. And my final slide, I'll give some good news and some bad news that has happened since the research was conducted. The good news is there's been less shellings in the area. So these industrial facilities are operating a little bit more efficiently than in the past. And there hasn't been any major incidents since my research was conducted. The bad news is we've all been paying attention to the news as of recent internationally. There's ongoing Russian hostilities on the border with Ukraine. And the other bad news is that there's still lack of continuous monitoring and evaluation in that region. And so as a conclusion, the environment is an essential aspect of human rights and is interconnected to human health and well-being. Therefore, it should be more effectively integrated into any analysis of human rights or international war crimes. So thank you very much. I know I went over a little bit of time, but I hope it was my contribution was useful and maybe thought-provoking to some degree. Thank you very much.
Well, Brendan, thank you very, very much. Thanking you, I would like to congratulate you for your courage doing all this at personal risks. So environmental peace building, because I'm sure this stock taking and taking evidence is a necessary ingredient for environmental peacekeeping, peace building, which we all hope will come later. And you made some conclusions in this respect as well. So it takes a lot of courage. You've had it, and I think the environmental community is grateful for you, grateful to you. We have collected a great array of different aspects of environmental damage, which I think will have to be digested. Unfortunately, we will not have enough time for questions and still less time for answers. But that being so, I have seen many requests in the chat for further information, for the possibility to contact the speakers. So I invite the organizers, if that has not been done already, to publish the emails of the speakers, if the speakers do not object, so that they can be contacted and can answer any additional questions, because I am sure time will not allow us to ask many questions, but I think all the speakers are available in the future. And this is one of the advantages of modern technology. Everybody can be reached everywhere. Now we come to the last contribution, which insists on the basic or more fundamental aspect of that, which is sustainable development. And here we are. The speaker is Bilal Aslam. He is a PhD student at the PhD in South Asian Studies from the Center of South Asian Studies, University of Punjab, Lahore. His PhD dissertation is entitled Environmental Peacebuilding Between Pakistan and India, Implications for South Asia. He has been a research fellow at the Department of Community and Environmental Sociology at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, and also served as a research analyst at Lahore Center for Peace Research in Pakistan. He participated in various national and international conferences, seminars, and workshops. His research interests include conflict transformation, environmental peace building, disaster risk reduction, and sustainable development. Bilal, you have the floor.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much for my introduction. And I think I have now less time, maybe 10 minutes or so. So I'll be very quick. And so the topic was environmental degradation as an unprecedented threat to human security in Pakistan. So one aspect that is not much relevant to this discussion is the inclusion of the environmental damages because of the conflicts. So I have added a bit portion of that as well. So basically, environmental degradation in Pakistan is a serious issue, like anywhere else. It has severe implications in terms of economic loss and the loss of biodiversity and natural habitat. And it puts serious constraints of human development and well-being of the people of Pakistan, as the previous presenters, they have aptly pointed out that it has a lot to do with the human development. So it has inverse relationship with the human security. So in Pakistan, there was an estimate that the economic cost of environmental degradation is like, it's $25.1 billion US dollars, which counts for 8.96% of GDP. It was the estimate. So it has increased vulnerability of the marginalized communities that are dependent on the natural resources. So there, I'm citing a few studies here. There was a study that was on the impact of violent conflicts and environmental hazards on pastoral sustainable development in Punjab, which is a province in Pakistan. And it indicates that the livestock holding is negatively influenced from violent conflicts and environmental hazards. And the study used cross-sectional survey data of 840 pastoral households of Punjab province in Pakistan, and found that now these people, they have higher vulnerability and low resilience regarding shocks due to feeble shock absorber institutions. And lastly, pastoral income and expenditure as welfare indicators are severely affected due to loss in livestock holding. They're dependent on livestock, so therefore they are more vulnerable. And then once we talk about environmental damage from conflict between Pakistan and India, so most of the panelists and listeners, they know that Pakistan and India, they are the neighboring states in South Asia, and they share a history of animosity and the rivalry. So I will talk about the impact of conflict on the environment. So in the research paper, I'm citing this work from Jennifer Crook, who wrote that war in Kashmir and its effect. Kashmir is a disputed territory between India and Pakistan, for those of you who don't know it. So she talks about that the deployment of Indian and Pakistani armies in Kashmir in 1947, the time when Pakistan got independent, led to large-scale poaching of rare species. It disturbed the natural flora and fauna. And then the first, I'm quoting something from her work. She says that at first the soldiers were killing the animals for food, but when the poorly paid soldiers realized how valuable the animal furs and skins were in the international markets, they started to slaughter the Kashmiri animals with much greater zeal. So the problem was that the soldiers from both India and Pakistan, so they started damaging the natural flora and fauna. And then there is another study that was conducted in 2002. It is titled as The Military Impact on the Environment. Said environmental stress is a cause and effect of political tension and military conflict between India and Pakistan. And they fought to exert or resist control on the natural resources of Jammu and Kashmir. And the study actually tells us that the Jammu and Kashmir, the area, the territory, the dispute is primarily because of the control. Both states, they want to take control of the natural resources. But the conflict is not good for the environment. So if the conflict continues, these resources become scarcer. And then the study says that the more human interference around these natural resources, the more environmental problems will arise. It's a natural consequence of the conflict in the shape of environmental damage. Kashmir, there was a in 1947, once Pakistan got independence, there was a densely forest area that was 37% of its total area, and that has reduced to 11% as of now. And there is another work that I am citing here. There is a website called the Third Pole, and by someone from Kashmir University. It says that the area, the dense forest around the tourist resort of Pahalgam, the region, southern Kashmir, has fallen by 191 square kilometers from 1961 to 2010, with an average annual loss of 3.9 square kilometers, largely due to illegal construction in a forested area. So because of the human activity and because of the illegal construction, it has led to more environmental damage. And then there was a recent conflict between India and Pakistan in 2019. Once the term that was coined was eco-terrorism. It was at Pulwama. Once Indians, they planned to attack, as they claimed that they were attacking terrorist camps in Pakistan's territory. The claims were not proved, and the Pakistani administration, they did not accept their claims. But the point of the these attacks were that they caused damage to the forest, and the evidence was there. The incident was followed by Pakistan deciding to lodge a complaint against India at the UN for committing eco-terrorism, because at that particular place, known as Balakot in Pakistan, that shares this border with India, there was damage in terms of the forests. So that's a recent example. So Pakistan in recent years has faced a lot of economic, social, and environmental challenges emerging due to issues such as urbanization, industrialization, and deforestation. And on top of that, the population growth. The resource base of the country is continuously being affected, and gradually increasing environmental degradation is further obstructing the sustainable development in Pakistan. So I would conclude by saying that there is a dire need to focus on sustainability, environment agenda for implementation of anti-environmental damage policy measures, and reducing violent conflicts in Pakistan. So hazards and risk-based advanced appropriate strategies need to devise for association with utilization of natural resources for promoting social sustainability and environmental integrity. It will automatically reduce the violent conflicts and resilience of natural resources from climate change. Thank you. And I would love questions from the audience. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. And I feel guilty in a way, because I should have stopped all these speakers much earlier in order to save time for the discussion. But I must admit I was really so much interested in the information we got from all the speakers. This has become really a most impressive collection of the various aspects of environmental damages which can occur in many conflicts just around the world. And I think in this respect, it has been very, very useful not to stop the speakers and continue to collect this stock taking. We have only 8 minutes left, so I would invite 2 or 3 questions from the floor, but the invitation stands that all the 4 speakers can be approached by anybody who's interested, and I think many people will be interested to have more information on the basis of these contributions. So there is already an announcement in the chat. So if you read the chat, you have the necessary information. Thank you, Teresa, that you already posted that. So I invite 2 or 3 questions. First come, first serve. Here we are. So may I choose one question from Jose Maynes Bosch to Brendan? What is the appropriate design and setup, if any, so that environmental program connect and build synergies with ongoing peace recovery plans? I think this is a question, and that's why I'm browsing through these questions, chosen it because it points to a very important issue. We are all a little bit confused, I must say. So I am confused, seeing the diversity of approaches, the diversity of organizations, governmental and non-governmental, civil society and governmental, which deal with these questions. But do you have any good idea of how to form a network of these organizations? So the question has been asked to Brendan, so I invite Brendan first, but the other 3 speakers are also invited to contribute to an answer to that particular question, which I'm afraid will be the last question in the remaining 5 minutes. Brendan.
So I would say 2 things on that question. One is they need to systematize the environmental impacts. So basically, I think, or at least from my research, unless one of our other panelists would tell me something different on this topic, but there's no real like indicator list set up that you would go in whatever organization that would seek to identify environmental crimes would take that list and then check off boxes when these different indicators are identified. So I think there needs to be some methodology set up that's internationally approved by, let's say, the International Criminal Court or a UN agency that would create a system for the identification of environmental crimes. I think that's one issue. And then the second one is there needs to be an online platform where all this data can be merged together. Because, for instance, OSCE has also done some reports in Ukraine regarding the environmental impacts of war. There's a few other non-governmental organizations that are working on that in Ukraine, but there's no online platform where all that data can be uploaded and analyzed by all the interested parties together. And so I think those 2 issues are big gaps that need to be addressed either by international organization or by a project, for instance, which would pull together all these different partners to create some online platform that then can be used for uploading and visualizing environmental crimes that are happening in the region. So that's what I would say from my side, and I'd be interested if any of the other panelists have something to add, or maybe they have information that I'm not aware of in relation to projects that have actually done that thus far.
Well, thank you. I think the closest to that is Montserrat. So Montserrat, do you have to add anything to what Brendan has said?
Thank you. Yeah, I shared completely his vision. I was thinking about the necessity about having a common platform for coordination regarding the classification of environmental crimes from legitimacy point of view. It would be important to have different actors on board, not only governmental international organizations, but also other different entities, not only private companies, but also specifically NGOs. Taking again the same case of study that I used, the case of Iraq, UNITAD has been serving as a platform for coordination, in even receiving inputs from NGOs and other entities and private companies who were working on the field much before than UNITAD, because UNITAD was established in 2017, but it was not operational on the field until 2 years later. So who were there before of that? Many NGOs, many civil society organizations taking the lead and preserving and storing and collecting many important pieces of evidence and beyond. And so, yes, it is necessary this coordination scheme. And well, maybe innovative ideas would be welcome, because maybe it is not necessary to have just one platform. It could be more than one. Maybe there could be innovations in this regard, but it is necessary to have this coordination being ensured.
Well, thank you very much. Everybody seems to agree. Bilal, anything to add?
No, thank you so much. It was really nice to be here and listen to all of the great presentations, and I'm great to participate. Thank you so much.
And finally, Dominique, est-ce que vous voulez ajouter quelque chose? Il paraît qu'il est disparu. He seems to have disappeared.
J'ai dit ceci. Je viens d'ajouter un lien là pour monsieur ou bien madame Eva, qui a demandé s'il y a des conventions conventions militaires sur la guerre. Donc, il y a un lien que je vais mettre là sur le chat qui reprennent les conventions selon CICR. On instruise aux militaires avant d'effectuer la guerre. Donc, les liens se trouvent en bas. Il peut consulter là, il verra les différentes conventions qu'on instruise aux militaires pour protéger l'environnement pendant le temps de la guerre. Merci.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm afraid we have run out of time, but I feel that this one question has led us to a conclusion which I think should be emphasized, and which would be a task for the Environmental Peacebuilding Association, because this network of stock-taking environmental damage caused by armed conflict, which seems to be necessary, would be a task for the Environmental Peacebuilding Association to host efforts to come to a network of such institutions, organizations, initiatives, and activities. So I think we have had a very rich information from different parts of the world. Thank you to the 4 speakers to have given us that information, which is more than data. It's a lot of food for thought for all of us. So thank you for that. And I'm really pleased that in the end, we come up with a certain proposal for future activities of our association, namely to initiate this type of connection or network between evidence-taking activities concerning environmental damages. So thank you for the patience of the attendance. I apologize that not all of you could ask the questions you are willing to ask. I can see that in the chat, but I'm glad that the speakers are available online or by email, so that all the curiosity could be satisfied. So this ends the session. Thank you very, very much. It has been a very interesting morning, and so happy conclusions. I have to go back to an announcement. There is an award session tomorrow at 3 p.m. Environmental Peacebuilding Awards and a Dialogue. You're invited to join, and there is a law interest group round table on Thursday, implementation of and compliance with international law protecting the environment in relation to armed conflict, which is very close to our session. So I'd like to invite your particular interest in these sessions. You know the procedure, how to register, and you are invited to do so. That ends my duty of chair of this morning's session. Thank you, and thank you also for the technical support. It has worked smoothly. I think the best support is the one you do not notice, because it's not needed, because all the good work has been done before. Thank you very, very much. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice.
Thank you, Michael, for the
Thank you
good
very
chairing.
much.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, and congratulations to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank
Take
you to
care.
the other